For those of you who are new to JWA, my name is Etta King. I'm the Education Program Manager here. So my job is to do all of our professional development programs, to do curricular development, and to support educators like you. Our mission is to document Jewish women's stories, elevate their voices, and inspire them to be agents of change. And the way that we do that work, at least in our education work, is really through essential partners like you, who are the people on the ground working with students and learners of all ages, sharing these stories and helping ask some critical questions in your communities. And you're really catalysts for bringing the rich and inclusive history of Jews in America to students and learners all across the country. So thank you so much for your part in that, and please always let us know how we can continue to support you in the work that you're doing. Our sort of framework for thinking about education focuses on the intersection of these two arrows. So really thinking about presenting historical role models and through primary source documents that sort of give us a sense of voice and a sense of legacy, and asking some critical questions about the experience of our predecessors in order to then ask some critical questions of ourselves as teachers or as learners. So thinking about who I am and who I want to be and what impact I want to have on the world. That's the end goal of all of our education work, and really giving students a historical perspective, A, links them into that legacy, and B, also gives them examples that they can analyze and talk about and compare to their own experiences. Let me just get this here. So there's 4 basic goals for this session, and this is one in a series of online learning programs that we have. So if you're interested in watching previous programs or attending future programs, we'll give you information about that. But our session today is focusing on music and how music played a role in building community in the civil rights movement, and also thinking a little bit about how music is a tool of activism to help overcome fear and move forward through times of challenge. We're going to be thinking a little bit about how Jewish experiences and Jewish values played out in activism that Jews did in the civil rights movement. And also we'll be modeling activities and showing you resources that are in lesson plans that we use so that you get a sense of how they're used in the classroom and you can replicate that in your community. So first, what I want to do is just show you the resource that we're drawing from for today's program. So I'm gonna share my screen with you. And you will tell me if you can see my screen. So are you guys seeing it? Before I start talking, I just want to make sure that you can see it. Great. Okay, it's small, so I'm gonna make it bigger. Okay, great. So this is the Go and Learn section of our site. Go and Learn is a series of activity guides, and each activity guide has 3 or 4 different lesson plans in it. Each lesson plan has age-appropriate resources for different groups of students. Today we're going to be focusing on this guide called Sing a New Song. And so you can see this lives in the education resources on our site. So if you go to education on the menu and choose Go and Learn from the drop-down, it'll take you to this list. And they cover a whole variety of topics. Each guide has, if you scroll down here, background information. So a short essay that will give you the background information that you need to speak about the topic, Sometimes educators like to excerpt from that information to give background during their actual program or lesson. It often gives you a starting point for doing some more research if there's something that piques your interest or something that you think you want to know more about. So there's the introductory or background essay. There are featured documents, which are primary source documents that we use. The same documents are used for all 3 or 4 lesson plans, but each lesson plan differs slightly in how the documents are used. And then the actual lesson plans for youth, which is usually for middle school or high school students, for family and congregational education, which often has activities, some activities for the whole group together and some that are just for adults and some that are just for kids, to sort of give people different levels for interacting with the themes and documents within the lesson plan, and one for adult ed. And what's great about the lesson plans, they're very straightforward. You can print them out and execute them as written. You can leave them for a substitute. This is a great resource for new teachers who don't have a lot of experience writing curricular materials or lesson plans. And you can also mix and match from the different lesson plans. I'm pretty sure that most educators who use our resources sort of pick and choose what's going to work. You know your community best. So taking what you think is going to work best for your community and putting something together is a really good way to go and a great way to use this material. So now I'm going to take us back to the PowerPoint. Hopefully. Here we go. And so that's just Go and Learn. And now we're going to jump into sort of the content from this Go and Learn activity guide. And I drew activities and questions from all 3 of the different programs just so you can get a sense of what's there. So you should browse the lesson plans that are going to be most useful for you. Okay, so first we're going to start with a little historical context. So I'm wondering what, if anything, you all know about Freedom Summer. So feel free to jump in talking or also to write in the chat box. And I know some of you attended our session on Freedom Summer that we had a few weeks ago, so you may recognize some of this material. Yep, so Freedom Summer was in 1964. Some people are saying they know little things, but not a lot. Allison says mostly nothing, so you'll get some more information about that now. So people went south to help register voters. Yep, absolutely. So this was a volunteer project. Yeah, so Leah is writing in 60 to 70% of the buses coming down from the north were Jewish. So yeah, there were a lot of the northern volunteers who were coming south for Freedom Summer. We estimate that about at least 50% of white volunteers were Jews. And it was very dangerous, says Tamar Citron. So yeah, so we're talking about Freedom Summer, not the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides actually happened a few years previous to this, but the same risks were involved. So, and Harriet saying, I lived through it, but was busy in college. So great. So yeah, 1964 was the summer of Freedom Summer. This timeline sort of shows you where in landmark events that took place. And Freedom Summer the project itself took place in Mississippi. It was a project that was run by CORE, or by COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations, which was all of the civil rights organizations, the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all of those sort of big groups were functioning together in Mississippi, this very entrenched racist state, to do work around enfranchisement and voter registration in Mississippi specifically. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was sort of the big arm of executing the vision of Freedom Summer. So as I said before, Jews made up a very significant part of the white volunteers coming from the north. and which is interesting, especially because they made up such a small part of the population. So Jews played a very large role, percentage-wise, in the civil rights movement and in this project in particular. And they differed in a lot of ways from activists and volunteers that were coming from the South. So whereas volunteers from the North were mostly white, they were mostly upper middle class or middle class students, college students. As we said, many were Jewish. They were coming into this place where the community and the other volunteers that they were working with were Southern, they were African American, they were Christian. The movement was very much taking place in sort of the Christian sphere, in churches and in church communities, and had a pretty wide range of activists who were involved, people who were sort of seasoned and had been working on civil rights for many years, and college and high school students who brought a sort of vibrance and energy. And there were several different projects that people were working on. So one was, as I mentioned, voter registration, canvassing, getting people to go and register to vote. This was a huge project, mostly because there were a lot of de facto practices. Though Blacks were legally allowed to vote, there were a lot of hoops that they had to jump through in order to do that. So there were taxes that needed to be paid. There were tests that needed to be taken. There was a lot of voter intimidation that was happening. There was also a lot of retaliation for people who tried to exercise their enfranchisement. So people who tried to vote would often be fired from their jobs. Their houses could be bombed. Their family members would be retaliated against. So it was really a risky thing, and getting people to show up and to participate was a huge part of that work. And also volunteers supported people who were losing their jobs or having some other form of retaliation against them. There were also freedom schools that taught literacy, taught about the Constitution, taught Black literature, and there was the sort of construction of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And if you want to know more about those projects, you can watch the recording of our Freedom Summer online learning program, or we're going to hold it again actually later in the spring, because this is the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer. There was also a lot of violence against these workers, as somebody mentioned before. And the most infamous sort of happened at the beginning of Freedom Summer on June 21st. 3 civil rights workers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Mickey Schwerner, were investigating a church bombing, and they were working with CORE, and they were kidnapped and later murdered by a group of Southern whites from the area. And actually, Mickey Schwerner's wife, Rita Schwerner, played a really big part in advocating for justice around their murders, and was a prolific organizer in CORE and with SNCC herself. Andrew Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, and Rita Schwerner were all Jews. And in addition, so this was at the very beginning of the summer. So you have to imagine you're a college student, you're coming from places like Cornell and Yale, and you have a few days or weeks of training. And during training, which happened in Oxford, Ohio, someone says, by the way, these 3 people were just murdered. You leave tomorrow. Get ready to get on the bus. And that was the reality that these volunteers were facing. And it was very frightening to them, but their commitment to justice was really central to them continuing the work. And also the sense that Southern Blacks were living with those risks every day. And a lot of volunteers really felt solidarity with that plight and felt like, I have to take on this risk. This is something that my brothers and sisters are living with every day, and I have a responsibility to step up and take that risk myself. And this quote from Rita Schwerner really demonstrates also the strategy of the civil rights movement to involve especially young white people, because the national media and the national government would notice when whites were being attacked and when whites were involved. And that was a very clear strategy of the movement all along. And volunteers knew that. They knew that, and they accepted that risk, and they continued on. And what we're going to be talking about for the rest of our time today is about how music and singing, group congregational singing mostly, led to breaking down the barriers of geography and of race between volunteers, led to building a community and to sort of bolstering the confidence of the workers to continue the work in the face of the violence and intimidation, and also of a lot of people who write about this describe the organizing work of Freedom Summer as very slow. It's hard work to meet people one-on-one, talk to them, and convince them to do something that's incredibly risky. And so that's what the volunteers were doing, and music played a huge part in allowing them to carry on that work. Any questions about Freedom Summer before we move on? Yeah. Okay, great. So Miriam posted in the chat the link to our next online learning program about Freedom Summer, which is coming up in a couple months. And the recording of our past program is also available, so you can sort of decide which program you'd like to attend. And now we're going to jump into our first primary source. So we base all of our work at JWA and sort of base it all on a foundation of primary source documents. So some of you who have attended our programs before may be familiar with this person or have read this document, but we're going to read this letter now by Heather Booth. Miriam, do you still want to read it out loud? Great. So Miriam's going to read it, and those of you who prefer to read along can also do that.
Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Anna? Anna can hear me. That's a good sign. Yes. To my brother, last night I was a long time before sleeping, although I was extremely tired. Every shadow, every noise, the bark of a dog, the sound of a car, in my fear and exhaustion was turned into a terrorist approach. We are not afraid. Oh Lord, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And then I think I began to truly understand what the words meant. Anyone who comes down here and is not afraid, I think must be crazy as well as dangerous to this project, where security is quite important. But the type of fear that they mean when we sing "We Are Not Afraid" is the type that immobilizes. The songs help to dissipate the fear. Some of the words in the songs do not hold real meaning on their own. Others become rather monotonous. But when they are sung in unison or sung silently by oneself, they take on new meaning beyond words or rhythm. There is almost a religious quality about some of these songs, having little to do with the usual concept of a God. It has to do with the miracle that youth has organized to fight hatred and ignorance. It has to do with the holiness of the dignity of man. The God that makes such miracles is the God I do believe in when we sing God is on our side. I know I am on that God's side, and I do hope he is on ours. John, please be considerate to Mom and Dad. The fear I just expressed, I'm sure they feel much more intensely without the relief of being here to know exactly how things are. Please don't go defending me or attacking them if they are critical of the project. They said over the phone, "Did you know how much it takes to make a child?" And I thought of how much it took to make a Herbert Lee, or many others whose names I do not know. I thought of how much it took to be a Negro in Mississippi 12 months a year for a lifetime. How can such a thing as a life be weighed? With constant love, Heather.
Great. So we usually like to start a close reading of letters with some general questions. We're not going to do all of them, but I do just want to ask you all if you have any observations that you would like to share about the letter or questions about the letter. So go ahead and jump in with those now. And I'll do my best to sort of capture what you all are writing in the chat. Okay, great. So Allison's writing in that she loves the line about the religious quality of the singing. I'm just gonna mark this up a little bit too. Looking at concepts that are universal and Marilyn saying the link between singing "We Shall Overcome" and prayer is great. Marilyn, can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, it's kind of like, what is prayer like when you're in it? Are the words are important, or is it singing together? That aspect of being in prayer is sometimes hard to access, but when you look at it in this context, there's a link there that I think maybe people don't really think about.
Yeah, great.
And this is Tamara Citrin. I would also like to jump in about that particular point, which is most times, if you look at the words in our prayer books, in our Sidurim, they express also this notion of that one day things will be better, right? That the world is not yet perfect, but we can all strive to make the world a little bit more perfect, and one day we'll get there. So I think that that's an inherent connection between the concept of the song "We Shall Overcome" and tefillah and prayer, because it's about changing the world and making the world a better place.
Great. Yeah. Lawrence is writing in that it's interesting that she sees a major value of the songs as being outside the words or explicit meaning, and how that could also be compared to something that's meditative. So the words are certainly important, but there's also something else about the community, about the action of singing together. And Leah is holding up this idea.
Can I jump in here for a second too?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Henry.
Sorry, I don't know if everyone can hear me. My name is Henry. I mean, I think in some ways, it's not, there's an explicitly religious quality to the songs, and they do have to do with the concept of God, especially within the civil rights movement. That's also sort of worth remembering, that I think she's tapped into something that really is there, even if she's not totally aware of it. I mean, when you have 200 people in church saying, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome one day, this is not anymore sort of like sort of like an abstract relationship to religion that we're talking about. It's really, really concrete, and that goes with a lot of these songs, which started out as gospel songs. A lot of them, in their full verses, do have a lot about God in them.
Yeah,
so
I think
it's worth thinking about that part too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that's interesting that comes out here is, which we aren't going to talk about a lot today, but I think is particularly interesting. Maybe we'll discuss this at a future program or in a meetup or something. But, this is the experience of Northern activists was very different. And many of them, including Jewish activists, didn't have the same concept of God, the same concept of religion and community. That differs a lot. And so I think what we're seeing here is a little bit of that, and a little bit of a difference between the way that people understand God and the way that people understand God's power and all of the things that sort of go along with that. I also want to pick up on a thing that a few people have mentioned now about the role of youth and how this was really a movement of young people, and thinking about how that contrasts with the feelings of parents whose kids were active in the movement. The family lesson plan really pulls out this and creates a discussion for that for adults, and thinking about activism and generations both within the movement and generations that were impacted by movement activism on the part, either kids on the part of their parents or parents on the part of their kids. So I'm not going to be able to capture everything, but the chat log will be posted online. So anyone who's watching the recording and all of you can also read the chat log after this. And Leah is pointing out that there are some other letters that we have on the site that touch on this sort of parent-child relationship. I want to ask a few specific questions, actually just one more specific question before we move on, which is, I'm going to combine all the questions, and just if anyone could sum up sort of the role that music is playing here for Heather. She talks a lot about that here. So anything that hasn't quite been reiterated or anything else that we want to say about music, its power, its role in the movement. An expression of hope. Allison is saying, Ellie's saying a connector, that music serves as a connector. Yep. Helping to conquer fear. Yeah, and that was something really that that was a big part. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And that music provided a connection to her core principles, her reasons for coming south and for being active. Yeah. So in sort of being transparent about how we do things at JWA, we like to present a primary source like we have here, give students some opportunities to interact with it, and then give them some discussion questions, which are here. We had our own discussion, and then some more information about the source or the person who created the source. So for those of you who don't already know, Heather Booth was a Jewish activist who went south for Freedom Summer after her first semester in college. This is a picture of Heather Booth with a few other women, including the woman facing the camera, who is Fannie Lou Hamer, a prolific civil rights activist, especially in the Mississippi movement, and sort of a mother figure for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Heather Booth talks a lot and writes about how she was influenced to do justice work after a trip that she went on in high school to Israel, and she visited Yad Vashem and sort of committed herself to working for justice. And that was a big factor in her decision to come south to Mississippi. And this is a quote that we took from a statement that she made. It might have been in our feminism exhibit or one of the other places that we have her on our site, just about sort of how she really connected the work that she was doing in Mississippi with her Jewish beliefs about justice, and that all of that for her was really connected and explicit. That's not always true. Some of the other activists that we feature in Living the Legacy and on our site really see that Judaism was a core but couldn't really express it at the time. So Heather actually is someone who really said, I'm Jewish, and because I'm Jewish, I'm going south. And that work continued for the rest of her life. She founded the first campus women's movement organization and has devoted her life to activism on the behalf of women and the African American community. Yeah, and a few of you are making some observations about the Holocaust being a motivating factor. We know that that was a really big factor in some Jews' participation in the civil rights movement, as was sort of disillusion with middle-class life and several other factors. And we have some resources on that if you're interested in exploring that more. So now that you know about Heather Booth, we know that she's Jewish, we know a little bit about her life story. Does it change the way that you think about the letter or understand it in any way?
No.
I see that a couple people are writing in, so I will eagerly await your responses. Okay. So it may not change the way that you think about it. So a few of you are saying you're not surprised. Leah saying the letter is multi-denominational. So thinking about values or core principles not necessarily being Jewish, and that's something that we've talked about a few times, you know, that a lot of Jewish values we express Jewishly or think about from a Jewish context, but are sort of more universal or core values. Some other questions now, sort of moving away from the letter and starting to think about singing. I'm just going to throw both of these questions out there, and I'm really interested in your responses. So thinking about whether you're a singer or not, your experiences being in a group singing, and also thinking about worship and how that might be similar or different from singing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two ideas.
This is Leia speaking. As someone who leads music, there are times when you make a choice in a worship setting to sing by yourself or to sing in a group. And when you're singing in a group, the choice is made because you want to evoke a specific feeling. You want to move a group to a specific place. And that can be a choice of melody. I'm tying it together with the second question regarding the Ve'ahavta. The Ve'ahavta chant is a creed that is almost recited in that meditative way that Lawrence was talking about earlier. Whereas worship music can be used in a different way. So it's interesting to see that framed in the context of what power music could have in terms of a social movement.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of people jumping in on the chat talking about how energy, volume, and melody can sort of help set the tone of a group, that the person leading or people singing get to influence that. I really like, Marilyn, what you said about linking your voice to others. So personally, my favorite part of going to synagogue growing up was singing harmony and hearing the different sort of paths the tune could take and hearing all of those voices together. And I think it's interesting to think about playing with that, listening for myself, and finding others in the group. That's great. A couple other people are writing in, so I'll just pause before we move on. Yeah, so just making some connections to the Shema. Yeah, Tamar, go ahead.
There's something, once words are spoken aloud or sung out loud together, it somehow transitions the words into like responsibility somewhat. Like, this is what we stand for as a community, and this is what we together are gonna try to change. And it makes it more communal as opposed to personal. And I think that's an experience like on Rosh Hashanah, you know, when the whole congregation takes responsibility for everybody in terms of how we like improve and get better. So I think that's what singing in group does.
I really like that. I really like that idea that by singing out loud, we're sort of making this statement, especially thinking of it in a movement context or an action context, that, you know, we're here, this is the work we're doing, we're all committing to it, and we can hold each other accountable to that. That's great. So I want us to get a chance to listen a little bit to some music. There is a ton of music online, a lot of it available for free through many different outlets. And we're gonna just listen to This Little Light of Mine, which most of you are probably familiar with. The particular recording that we're gonna listen to now is from 1963. It's a recording that was done by Betty Fikes, who was a prolific singer in the civil rights movement. She was active a lot in Alabama, and based on the lyrics of this song, I have a feeling that this was actually recorded in Alabama and in the Alabama movement as opposed to the Mississippi movement. But I'm gonna play this for you all. Oops, sorry. recording is 4 minutes long, so we're not going to listen to the whole thing. We'll post a link to it on the page for this, so you'll be able to listen to it and other songs. Many of the different lesson plans in the Go and Learn activity guide covered different songs in addition to this Little Light of Mine, but since this was the one that was in all three, I wanted to use this one. So just a quick question about that. Let's just talk for a minute about what feelings we get from listening to the song and also observing a little bit about the melody and structure and lyrics of the song. So a lot of people describe this song as catchy. What makes it catchy? Allison says it makes her think of preschool. Tamar saying it makes her think of strength and feel strength. It's repetitive and there's a low threshold for participation, right? So Betty Fikes comes in, she sings the first line of the verse, and everybody knows the verse is This Little Light of Mine, and the rest of the songs they know. Or the rest of the words they know, and so they can sing along with each other. You can hear that it's happening sort of in a large room with lots of people singing along. Marilyn saying it's centering on light, which is something that people can relate to and relate to it sort of on different levels. Yeah, it's a pretty open metaphor there. It follows a pattern. There are simple lyrics. Right. All of this is very good. Anything else people want to add? Yeah, so Lauren's also making an excellent observation that repetition doesn't only make it easy to participate, but also builds emphasis and helps it to gain steam. Great. Yeah, great. So again, I put the discussion questions here, but we sort of talked about that in our own way. I just want to make a few points about freedom singing, and then I want to make sure that we leave time for questions and for our last activity, which is going to be our little songwriting tutorial. So freedom singing, as we could sort of hear in the recording, was done in big groups. It was done often at mass meetings, which were frequently held in churches or other community buildings, and also at marches and on protests. It helped raise the spirits of people and bind them together, create a community, which we've talked about, and reminded people, as was mentioned before, about their commitment to the work, about sort of the importance and even holiness of the work that they were doing in the movement. It also demonstrated power in a really concrete way, right? This is 200 people all singing together. It's really loud. It's really energetic. Everyone's clapping and singing. People are taking different turns, sort of leading and following. It was really explicitly demonstrating this is what many voices coming together to make change is like. And that also helped to bolster confidence, to make people feel less afraid, and to sort of find comfort in one another's company. As Henry mentioned before, many freedom songs and protest songs came out of the gospel tradition of the African American Southern Church. And it's interesting to read accounts of how Jewish volunteers embraced that and also struggled sometimes with ideas of nonviolence, which was also very much out of the Southern Church tradition, and thinking about how that sometimes came in conflict with this very sort of active and aggressive resistance that is the tradition of sort of the Jewish narrative. So it's interesting to think about how music helped to create and sort of indoctrinate people into the principles of the movement in that way. And then, as we mentioned, the structure makes it easy to learn, easy to sing. It was passed on orally, so people were not sending each other records of this. An activist in one part of Mississippi would learn a song and then take it with them to the next place that they went, and everyone was singing different variations of these songs. So I'll just go back to the lyrics here. So the lyrics that she has tell Governor Wallace. Governor Wallace was the governor of Alabama, who was very anti-segregationist. Jim Clark was the sheriff of Dallas County. At the time they were singing this song, there was a huge voter registration project going on in Dallas County in Alabama, and the sheriff was working actively against that. So, and also the focus on me, the focus on God, the focus on the community. The lyrics, even though it's only one line that changes, are really adaptable. So, any questions or observations or anything like that about the song and freedom singing in general before we move on to the last part of our session? Okay. So now we're going to have a very mini crash course in songwriting. And I asked my friend and colleague Henry to join us today for this part. Henry Neuwirth is a community organizer for the Merrimack Valley Project. He's also a member of the 2013-2014 Jewish Organizing Fellowship class, which I am also a part of. Henry grew up in New York City and recently graduated from Carleton College in Minnesota, where he majored in religion. He also worked to create more curricular civic engagement opportunities for students there and was the program director of the Carleton College radio station, KRLX. Henry has worked extensively with the Haiti Justice Alliance, which is a nonprofit that connects Minnesota colleges to grassroots organizers in Haiti. And he's going to talk with us a little bit today about how to get your students and your learners to write their own songs. Songwriting is not something that comes naturally to all of us, although I do know that we have a few songwriters in our group today. And it's certainly not something that will come naturally or be comfortable for all of your students. So Henry's just going to give us a couple tips. So take it away, Henry.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks to Etta for inviting me to talk with you. Yeah, I guess I was going to talk a little bit about sort of songwriting and then the role of music in the civil rights movement, sort of spinning off of today, and why it was so important and continues to be in the justice work that I do here in northern Massachusetts. And then also talk a little bit about teaching songwriting, which I have probably a full 1 day of experience of, and just wanted to tell a story of how that went, because it went so smoothly, easily, and I think made a huge impact both on me and the whole group that I was working with. So to kick it off, I was trying to think about this little light of mine, because Etta told me that was the song that we were going to be talking about, and just why, when I think about that song, I think about the videos I've seen of just hundreds and hundreds of people marching together, singing that song in church, singing that song. Like, why is that so powerful, and what makes that so powerful? And I would argue that music in justice movements is not incidental or sort of an artistic output of the movement, but is just right at the core of what makes movements, certainly in America, go. That it drives them. It is the praxis of what they are, to use sort of a religion term. It's in practice what they're doing is singing these songs, and it creates a lot of the relations. So I guess, and I think that the songs wouldn't mean so much to me if I didn't know them. So I tried to think of when I heard the song, and I think I might have actually been taught the song by Pete Seeger himself. When I was a kid, I grew up in New York, and Pete Seeger had this weed wallow every year. He wanted to take care of the Hudson River, so he would sort of draft thousands of kids, and he would bring them out to the water, and he would sing to them and, tell us all these songs, and we didn't know how much of a big deal he was, but we would learn all these songs, and we were young enough to kind of put up with him. And we would be picking weeds in these oversized boots in the Hudson River, which remains and completely polluted. And I think of just this huge community event, probably one of the first times I was ever civically engaged in my life, and something that I definitely took with me going forward after that. And we didn't know that we had this sort of the sort of father of, folk songwriting there doing it with us, but it seemed like an old man from the community who was able to, still sort of impart these lessons both of activism and of songwriting and storytelling with all of these children all at once every summer. I think it had a big impact on a lot of the kids who were there. And the second thing that I think of is religion, and Etta talked about that, but it really is a religious experience to be singing these songs, and I think that's just sort of central to what it is. I think Heschel said something, when I was walking in Selma, my legs were marching or something along those lines. A pastor here was telling me about that about a week ago, and I don't think it's anything. I don't think it's too much to say that when people in the civil rights movement were singing, they were praying, and there's a certain messianic quality to it which shouldn't be ignored. I mean, we shall overcome one day. There is a certain bit of Jesus coming back, and in some of the verses you see that this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, has a Protestant edge to it as well. So there's something to think about there too. So now I want to tell a little bit about sort of the songwriting session that I led and why I think it went so well and what happened. I'm in this group with Etta, and we all had to lead sort of a session with a bunch of organizers to teach them something about organizing, or to facilitate something about Jewish learning. But I wanted to do the organizing because I'm working as an organizer right now. And I didn't want to do something that sort of someone else could do better than me, and I didn't know if there was anything that I could do particularly better than anyone else, so I thought I'd do something sort of whimsical, and that might be a way out. And I went with songwriting just because it's something that I've done for a long time, not as much songwriting even as much as just playing. I play a lot of instruments. It was a major part of sort of my family growing up, singing not only within a Jewish context, but also just sort of, around the dinner table with, guitars and fiddles and pianos and things like that. And I sort of brought this to my supervisor, and I said, look, I'm going to teach a protest songwriting workshop. And she was sort of like, you think people really can write protest songs? And my attitude was, we'll see. So here's what we did. We listened to two songs, one by Bob Dylan and one by Nina Simone, both about the Medgar Evers shooting in the 1960s. We talked a little bit about sort of the devices that they were using and came up with some key ones. One is that the songs both relied around a chorus with a sort of a central metaphor. In this one, it's, as I was talking about, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And then the verses, here they're very small, go tell Governor Wallace, but they can be longer as well, had sort of more specific elements of what specifically was at stake in this protest song. But it usually had a refrain of a metaphor and then some sort of more detailed chorus where the personality of the song would unfold. And the other thing is that they were really, really simple. I mean, a good protest song is almost always really simple, especially if you're teaching it to kids or to people that aren't used to playing music. And if you're having 300 people sing it at once, that's probably the way you want to go. So you don't need to know really anything about music to write a protest song. If you're going to do it on guitar, you really only need to know two chords, and you can kind of pair any two together as long as they're in tune. But something of a, G, C, G, C, G, D. I mean, if you know a G, C, and a D, you can write a protest song. And if you just have your voices, then it comes fairly naturally if you're just sort of trying to sing in key with yourself. But for the music people, yeah, I mean, it's just, if you know a 1, a 4, and a 5 in any key, you can write a protest song. And so what we did is we sort of paired off into groups, and everybody's task was to, in 20 minutes, write a full song, which is, was a lot to ask. And people came back with just tremendous material. I mean, this isn't just like I think Etta can speak to this as much as I do. How did it go for you?
Well, I think Henry and I think we're in the same group, and Henry was like, we're going to write this song. And I sort of sat in the corner with my arms crossed because I was like, I don't do that. I sing songs. I don't write songs. And it went really well. Like everyone was really impressed. We have video somewhere, so maybe I'll try to dig that up and put it online and share it with you all. They came out really well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, so our group sat and we said, like, let's think of a metaphor. Someone said lines being crossed, and we thought that was good, kind of like light being shown. There's lines that are crossed, and you can do a lot with it. So we had a really similar format. It was, I don't remember the words word for word, but something like, there's a line, and then the sort of verses were made up of different lines that we wanted to see broken down. So the metaphor is one piece, and the other thing is to think of things that make you angry. That's something that organizers spend a lot of time trying to do. But you want to write a protest song that really digs to the core of what you're passionate about. So if there's something that you want to see changed, that's probably the thing that you want to write a song about. And you want to frame it in such a way that it's not just about you, but it's about everybody in the room, unless you're trying to get the thing released on on the radio. But I think that's not really the context most of us are talking about right now. So I guess I would say that this is like, writing protest songs seems to me like an essentially democratic thing. I think anybody can do it. Everybody can sing them. And that's the beauty of it. If it was some sort of high art that came down from the songwriters, then it wouldn't have very much place in a lot of the movements that we'd work in. And I guess the only thing that I'd add then after that is that in my work here in the Merrimack Valley, we're dealing with music all the time. So I organize churches and synagogues and unions up in the northern Massachusetts and Lawrence and Lowell. And if you go to church in a Pentecostal Latino church in Lawrence on any Sunday, I mean, there's a full band and the entire place is up and singing. And if you go to church at the Unitarian Church in Andover, there's one dude with a guitar singing a sort of much happier version of Blowin' in the Wind. But there's no, I mean, in every church that you go to that I work with, and I'm working mostly with congregations that are doing a lot of justice work, again, you have this not aside from sort of the religious hymns, you have a lot of this protest music that's infusing the work that they're doing. And then at our own events, there's always people singing, especially at the bigger ones. We have a big event later on where we've got, the union guys want to come in with their band and play all these protest songs, and people are excited about that. So we'll see how that goes over with everyone. But, it's just that it's such a central piece to how people relate to each other, and, carving up time together seems like, exactly what both music and protest seems to be about. So I know we're about to sort of try to write a line ourselves, and for the songwriters, it may seem like you could do a lot more, and for people that have less experience, it may seem like, what are you trying to get me to do? But, I think that's an easy activity to do with everybody, that people are usually impressed by their own natural creativity, and it's a great lesson for kids also.
Great. Thanks so much, Henry. I really am going to try to find those videos somewhere. I think one of them might be on my phone, so I'll have to look and send it to you all as inspiration. And if you do this in your communities, please send us the videos, because we would love to share those with people. So I put a couple notes about what Henry was saying in the chat, and also we have a few tips here. We're gonna run a little bit over because there are two more short things that I want us to do. So one is Miriam is gonna put a link to something called a Lino board in our chat, which is basically just a virtual sticky notepad. And what I'd like you all to do is write your own lyrics. Yeah, if you have to go, that's totally okay, and we'll be in touch with you with the follow-up information. But I want you to take a minute, think about sort of the concepts that Henry laid out, and try writing your own lyric. So it's just one line to replace this little light of mine in this little light of mine song. And if you can come up with more than one, post as many as you would like. So go ahead and just click on that link, and you click on a sticky note, choose whatever color you like, and post a line. If you can't get to like the line, which is about 7 syllables, give or take, depending on how you can squish it in there, feel free to just riff off of some of the other things that Henry spoke about. So what makes you angry? What do you want to change? What other metaphors might be useful, or maybe what the light metaphor makes you think of. We're just going to take 2 minutes for people to do that, and if more ideas come to you, you can always come back to the Lino board and post more. I'm going to try to write some too. Okay. And if you want to keep it anonymous, that's fine. If you want to write your name, you can also do that. Okay. So it seems like people are working on their stickies. Feel free to post more here or to post in the comment section of the webinar page. We'll send you the link to that tomorrow. And let us know if you have any other ideas. In the meantime, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to move us on to the last thing that I want to talk about today, which is the Tversky Award. So this is relatively unrelated to everything else that we've been talking about, but since you all are here, I want to make sure that I mention it. So the Natalia Tversky Educator Award is an award that we give each year to an educator who creatively uses primary sources to highlight the stories of women, Jewish women, in their classrooms or communities, and really works to integrate the inclusion of women's stories in the lessons that they're teaching and the sort of narrative that we're passing on about Jews and about Jewish life in America. The application requires an original lesson plan using primary source documents. We have many primary sources on our site, but you can also use primary sources from other places. And it has to highlight the stories of women in some way. You also need to submit examples of student work, a 30 to 60-minute video, which is really just set up a camera and record some of your lessons so that the committee can get a sense of what that looks like. And then a resume and cover letter. So it's a chunk of stuff for the submission, but not much more than you would do if you were already writing a lesson plan from scratch. So that, I think, is a good thing to sort of put it in perspective. And also the prize for the winner is $2,500 for yourself plus $500 for your school or your program to use towards growing your gender inclusive programming and teaching about Jewish women. So it's a really fantastic opportunity. I really encourage you all to take advantage of it. And if you're interested in applying for it, to contact me. The deadline is May 12th. So you have a couple months, and there are lots of opportunities with African American Heritage Month, Poetry Month, Women's History Month, Jewish American Heritage Month. Actually, Jewish American Heritage Month might be June, but many sort of themed months coming up, and also lots and lots of opportunities, always opportunities to bring in women's stories. So I really encourage you to consider applying for that award, to telling your excuse me, colleagues about the award. And if you have any questions about the award, about the content that we talked about today, or about JWA, feel free to stick around. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at some of our future programs. You'll be given a link to the survey. Excuse me, I have something in my throat. So please complete the survey, and thanks so much for coming.